Hello, my name is Chris Snipes, and you are listening to The Melt. In a multiverse that is multidimensional and intrinsically interconnected, are there really coincidences as we've come to know them? I think what may be occurring in those instances is the revealing of a more complex system of order and, within our current context of linear time, a seemingly abstract display of cause and effect. What can restrict us from realizing this is our frame of reference. If we can gain the advantage of zooming out, we can truly see how everything is inextricably intertwined, and that sometimes the cause and effect are separated by decades and can also operate retroactively. The podcast Pennyroyal is an exercise in exploring the labyrinthine connections between events and phenomena that have been occurring within the Pulaski County area of Kentucky. More precisely, the town of Somerset, where there is an unusually high presence of magnetism, quartz crystals, subterranean tunnel systems, and a variety of different religious cults. I'm joined today by the host and writer of Pennyroyal, Nathan Isaac, to discuss the plethora of high strangeness that seems to gravitate around Somerset, and just how immense the mystery seems to be and how it continues to manifest. I start off the conversation by asking Nathan what inspired him enough about all of this to want to make it into a podcast.
When I moved down to Somerset, my wife is from Somerset, and I'm from Eastern Kentucky, from Appalachia. And so we lived in Lexington, moved down here. Lexington's where the Fayette factor, if you've ever heard that before, where places that are named Fayette, weird things happen. That whole thing that Grimstead actually wrote about is in Lexington, Kentucky, where I was at, right? But I went to school at Transylvania University, which I think is funny. but you know, that's Kentucky. But Kentucky was going to be named Transylvania, and but because the land company was called the Transylvania Company, and they had bought before all these states had been divided up, and so it just means through the woods, obviously, but Kentucky almost became Transylvania, but instead it became Kentucky, which apparently means dark and bloody ground, you know. So, but anyway, but we moved from Lexington back here where she's from, to help her parents with family business. And I was kind of like, oh my God, I've moved from a small town back to a small town that I thought I wouldn't go back to. And you know, you get to a place and you don't know anybody. We move here and you leave all your friends behind, and it was kind of like, well, what's interesting about this place? And definitely I've always been into strange things, and Forteana and all that stuff. And so, yeah, you know, of course, the first thing I look up is, and prior to coming to Somerset, the one thing I did find out was, I'd always heard that Sedona was a hot spot for UFOs. And people would, you know, the articles I was reading were saying that the place was it was a hot spot because of all the geomagnetic energy, the quartz. You know, there's like a 2-mile quartz deposit under there. I've since gone to Sedona, and I love Sedona, but just you know, I didn't go visiting vortexes or anything, but I just love the place. You know, it's just the culture there is very magical, and but anyway, so um, after I heard that theory, I pulled these maps off of um, the internet that you can get from some of the space agencies. I can't remember if it was the European Space Agency or what, but they have these KMZ files. You can just drop them on top of Google Earth, and it'll like show whatever the satellite view is. If it's ocean temperatures you're looking for or whatever, and they have one for geomagnetic activity. And so I dropped it in there, and sure enough, Sedona lit up, and then this place in southern Alaska, and then a place in the southeastern United States. And that's when I was like, oh my God, I can test this theory out. I can go to this place, ask some people, hey, you guys are under the influence of these powerful geomagnetic fields. Do you see any UFOs? So I zoom all the way down, and it was Somerset, Kentucky. And that's when I started digging deeper into that, because I was with Amy, with my wife, and at the time we weren't married yet, but we were dating, and I was like, well, that's Somerset, that's where you're from. And when you dig deeper, you find that NASA has a ton of research about this, and it's called the Kentucky Anomaly. And it really is it is the most powerful spike of geomagnetic energy, field strength in the Western Hemisphere. They don't know why. It's something to do with the core of the Earth, but it is so powerful that the Van Allen belts do dip down just over Kentucky. But I mean, NASA had there are tons of papers on this stuff, right?
Wow.
And so whenever you take the NASA, they don't have the counties divided up on the map, right? But when you just take Kentucky, superimpose the counties, and then take their map of the anomaly, Pulaski County, Somerset is right in the center. Like Somerset is the center of the spike, and it's so intense that it changes the gravitational field in this area. They actually have it shown there that there are these gravitational anomalies right in the center where it's the most intense, which is Pulaski County.
That's
And
crazy.
it's just weird. It's just
Would you know if you just happened to you needed to stop to get gas or something on a road trip? Would you know to stop in this town that it was such a vortex of all this crazy shit going on?
well, I mean, I'll say this, like, I've never felt like that, right? I've never sensed that. But after I tell people this, sometimes you'll get people say, you know what, man, I'm from New York. One person was from New York, and they told me that ever since they moved here, they felt more weighed down. But it was after listening to me say that, so did they really feel that way or not? I don't know. And then they're like, well, when I go back home to New York, I feel so much lighter when I leave this area. But again, it's like, did I
Yeah,
cause that?
sure.
The only thing I will say is that in Hellier in season 2, when they interviewed me, and I told some of the stories here in town, um, and I've talked about this before, that my wife did see, when she came out of the upstairs bathroom here that's just above me. um, it was a couple years after we'd been here, 2-3 years, and she walked out middle of the day and saw the thermostat slide 3 feet across the wall, 3 feet down, and then bounce back into place. And then 2 years later, it happened again. And she doesn't believe in any of this stuff. She's not into the high strangeness stuff. She didn't even see it as a paranormal experience. I mean, she was afraid something went wrong in her brain, but it's like that's strange. I mean, so then you've got to wonder, was that some type of spatial distortion, right? That was, because it's like someone sees that it has this obvious like bending quality to it. And we're in this place that so happens to be so intense with these geomagnetic fields, and the gravity is affected here. A lot of people that I interviewed in this area while we were making the show have poltergeist stories that only happen once. So they would tell me, if I asked them, what's the strangest thing that's happened to you in Somerset, they'd tell me something like, well, a doll floated off my shelf into the center of the room and then dropped to the floor. And then I'm like, well, did you have any more poltergeist activity? Anything else happen? There's no, just happened one time. But lots of people would tell me about these objects moving, and then that was it. Nothing else. No hauntings. No ghosts.
That's so
But
odd.
but they don't talk to each other. I'm talking to all these people. So of course I connect it to, is it a spatial distortion? Did that object move because of that, not because of a haunting, not because of a poltergeist or something? So we didn't put any of that in the show, but I do have a collection of those stories, and it's like they don't really fit anywhere, you know.
It's weird that it bounced back. It's like that's very almost like something on an iPad or something that you would see. Like, you know what I'm saying? It's like that animation where things kind of, yeah, that's so crazy.
Yeah, it's weird, and she hates it when I tell that story.
Because she doesn't want it to have any more airtime.
Yeah,
yeah. That's funny that she's not into that at all.
And but it happened. Of course, everyone's like, "But did you see that?" She's like, "Yeah, I saw it. I don't know what it was." But yeah, I mean, it's strange. For me, it adds weight to what NASA's already talked about. It's just, how does that manifest for us? So, but so I knew that moving down here, and knew that that there were a lot of UFO sightings and things, which intrigued me, and ultimately, the biggest thing that, of course, I was like passively, not actively collecting stories, but I love stories and love folklore. And so, of course, anytime I talked to someone that had a great strange story, I would write it down or record it. But really what started me down this path on to making pennyroyal was driving around the downtown square and seeing all the people with the signs. And the signs were pointed at City Hall, and they said, you did it. And I thought, what in the world are these people holding these signs up for? So when I got home later that evening, I was talking to my neighbors, and I told them what I saw downtown, and they said, those are the family members and friends of those two kids that were murdered here in town. And they think the people in power here, politicians and lawyers and judges and things, doctors, were responsible for murders. And they, every year on the anniversary of the murder, they would stand in the town square and point these signs at City Hall. And I thought, man, what is this? so that caused me to dig into that story, which is the death of Linda and Cody Gibson, and which Dateline came here in 2019. They did a special. It was the 25th anniversary of these two unsolved murders of these two kids. She was 21. Linda was 21, and then Cody was 4.5 years old, and they were found murdered, unsolved murder, very high profile murder. FBI was involved, but here in town, just a lot of strange things about the case. And the thing that kind of I found later, that the stories I was being told, especially by my neighbors and other people, were a blending of three different stories. At first we heard a narrative that was the common narrative, and sort of the urban legend surrounding it that involved a cult, and people in power, sort of like an Eyes Wide Shut description to it, and I was like, I don't think that's happening here. But everyone, oh yeah, these guys, these rich guys, these people in power, these patriarchs of the town are involved in it. The cops are involved, all these, just grew into this thing. And this is pre, QAnon or anything like that. That was actually one of the fears in covering some of the Pennyroyal story, was that when I started to record all of this and interview all these people, of course, they're talking about people kidnapping children and all this stuff, but QAnon wasn't in the news. And just as we were finishing production on Pennyroyal, this all exploded with QAnon. And, it was like a resurgence of the Pizzagate thing. And I was terrified that we were going to release Pennyroyal in the midst of all of this, and that QAnon or, some extremer group would take this and say, look, this is evidence of what's happening. And Greg Newkirk even said to me, dude, once you put this out, they were already contacting them after Hellier 2 came out saying, oh, you guys know where the kids are hidden in the caves. We need to send the FBI in there to save those children. And it's like, that's not happening here. So you don't want those types of narratives to come across, and then definitely once Pennyroyal was released, for the most part, we had fantastic reception for the show, but a few people still were kind of like, those kids are in the caves, and it's like there aren't any, human trafficking and child trafficking are a real thing. Now, I do not believe there's a coordinated cult here in town doing anything like that. The story is weirder than that. It's stranger than that. Those are real things that need, that people should be investigating. But there isn't a cult here that's doing anything of that sort. So, but go on.
Well, so for the people who are listening that maybe haven't listened to Pennyroyal, what would cause these townsfolk to think that the city officials had anything to do with these two murders?
So, the details of the murders, that's a fantastic question, man. No one has ever asked me that question before. That's a fantastic question.
It seems pretty obvious to me. I don't.
No, it's true though. That's the question I was asking myself was, what? Why would you think that? Definitely when you dig into, I don't want to dwell too much on the murder stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, there's much more to cover.
It's not like a. Yeah. But I just mean like I apologize if I go off onto a tangent on this a little bit, but just the idea to me, people are describing something that's like this eyes wide shut thing, and it has these undertones of like ritualism, almost like Cthulhu, Lovecraft, and to me, it's like there's no way these people in this town are practicing magic, ceremonial magic. There's just absolutely no way. And not to call anyone a country bumpkin, but the people they're accusing are just sort of like rich country guys, and I was like, there's just this can't be. And you find, like I said, it was 3 different stories that they had sort of blended together. There was a story of corruption, and then these murders were not related to that, right? And another murder in an alleyway, and that involved some drug dealers. And so people had sort of blended that together, saying, well, the cops are involved. Sammy Catron, the sheriff that took over the case, and kind of what people believe he fudged the case. They always accused him of being involved. But I don't think he actually was, but he was later assassinated at a fish fry here, just a few years later.
Wow.
Which in our research, to me, he was this messianic figure here in town who flew around in a helicopter instead of driving a patrol car. They even had his little helicopter that you could put a quarter in at the local grocery store. And you can actually buy it they have one of them for sale for $600 at one of the antique malls here in town, which we almost bought for Kyle Cadell, who owns the museum here in town, the Paranormal Museum. He wanted to get it, but my wife was like, that's morbid, Nathan. And it's true. It's like we would only be buying it as some strange curiosity. But that sheriff, Sammy Catron, he had this like, it was sort of a messianic figure. He gets assassinated, and to me, it just seemed like this killing of the king ritual, almost like a JFK assassination, you know. And Downard, James Shelby Downard, sort of talks about that in the King Kill 33 essay, right? But anyway, that's where it all sort of came from, was that there are always these rumors that these guys that were in power were getting together and having these wild parties. Definitely at the time this was happening, the bluegrass conspiracy was happening in Lexington, in central Kentucky, and the Chagres brothers. I forget what country they were from, but anyway, the South American drug dealers were running drugs into Lexington, Kentucky, in central Kentucky, and they'd gotten the sheriff, or the chief of police was involved, all these people in the city council, and they were having these parties, right? And they were selling drugs to the UK students, to the University of Kentucky, and then the cops were busting them and then taking the drugs back and then reselling it, right? And
Wow.
the guy that was, yeah, right, isn't that crazy? So the guy that was spearheading that was named Andrew Thornton the second, and he's tied to the CIA. There are all these crazy things that spiral out of this. A really famous journalist named Stanley Denton wrote a book called The Bluegrass Conspiracy, which I highly recommend, and sort of a no frills, this is what happened. And it all unraveled when the guy that was spearheading it was chased in a DEA plane. He was in a plane. He jumps out with too much cocaine on him, and then his parachute doesn't save him because he weighs too much. And this guy in Knoxville, right? He falls to his death. This guy in Knoxville comes out of his house the next morning and finds a guy with like 50 kilos strapped to him in his driveway.
My God.
And the plane drives on, right? The plane goes on and crashes in the, I think it was the Blue Ridge Mountains, which I think is funny just because of all the Hellier stuff, you know, and that stuff. But and there's a famous story about a cocaine bear. They found a bear in those mountains, and it had torn into the cocaine that was in the crashed plane, and had died, had a heart attack. Oh. And there's a news story. If you Google that, you'll find the news story about that. And so anyway, that was happening. The story I was hearing was happening in central Kentucky. I do think it filtered out into other counties. You know, and Somerset's a really big county. I think it's the third largest in the state. And it has, 65,000 people in the county is a lot of people. I think there's only 12,000 in the city. But I think that some of those things were happening here. I do think there were sort of cocaine-fueled parties going on. Probably some prominent people were involved. And that's a great way if you did have underage girls or boys or whatever at a party like that. You've got blackmail on these politicians. You know what I'm saying? Just has to skirt the line. You know what I mean? You
got to document it somehow.
Girl you think's 21, 17. Right. Yeah, right. And see, there was another case here in town where there was a tape of a party. And it wasn't tied to these murders, but the people here in town had made that a part of the story. You know, and I later found out that it wasn't related to this, right?
Gotcha.
But that doesn't take away the strangeness of the fact that, you know, I find all this stuff out. We interview town historians, all these people, and I figure out that it's this, you know, this narrative I'm getting is a blending of local stories. So I'm like, there's no cult, you know. Let's put a pin in that, you know. And then Dana and Greg and Carl and part of the crew of Hellier, right? They show up and they interviewed Kyle at the museum and had asked him, is there anyone else we should talk to? And he was like, oh, you should talk to Nathan. He's been researching all this stuff here in town. And so they come over to our studio, which is above Jarfly Brewing. And at the time, because I was researching the town, I was researching all this weirdness. It was really meant to be a chronicle of the folklore here. I mean, that's why the whole byline of the stories of the podcast is the magic and mystery of place. You know, it's how a place interacts with the people interact with the place, and that's what fascinated me about it. And so I just wanted to record all these fantastic stories that I was hearing from all these people, and the crime stuff, the paranormal stuff. But then they show up and they ask me about the paranormal stuff. I tell them all the stories about the UFOs, Bigfoot sightings, all that stuff. And then and tell them about the Kentucky Anomaly research. And then he's like, "So what do you think's going on?" I said, "Well, let me tell you the crime stuff, because I think there's something related between the two." So I tell him the story about the murders and the cult. And at the end of it, that's when he's like, "We haven't told anybody this, but the reason we're in Somerset is because this woman from Somerset has been emailing or messaging us saying there's a cult here in town." And he starts telling me the exact same story I've told him, right? But she's in jail, the Amy girl, Amy from Hellier 2. She's in jail because she says she's been framed, for investigating this cult. So I've just confirmed for him what he had heard from her, that he was like, there's no way this is true, right? And then he's telling me another woman, and we'd interviewed a couple of people that had this story about the cult. He's telling me another person is saying, and it even has more details. And now I'm worried that I'm putting my family in danger, because I'm like, shit. what if there actually is a fucking cult, So he leaves, they leave, and and Darian and I and Kyle, I'm like, I don't know, guys, we should maybe stop researching this stuff. I don't know if this is a good idea.
Was this kind of early on in the process?
This was, at this point, I'd done a little over a year of just the podcast, of getting stories and putting everything together, right? That was the moment that that it became a little bit more personal, and I didn't realize how personal it was going to become at the time. That was just sort of like the intersection of them coming here, because we didn't know that they were even shooting for the second season. They didn't tell Kyle or us that. They just were saying, "Hey, we're back in Kentucky. We're doing some footage for some stuff," And of course we wanted to be in, what I mean? It was like, well, I hope that it was for Hellier, but who knew, but after they left, that's when Kyle asked, one of the people that we had been interviewing was a woman named Pamela, and she had these memories of being in a cult right here in town, which to her was the satanic cult. That was probably, for me, ethically, in terms of beginning to, in a sense, be a documentarian of this. It's easy to ask people, "Oh, you have a weird story? Have you seen Bigfoot? Have you, seen a black cat sighting?" That's the most common thing here, is that people see these alien black cats that absolutely don't exist here. There are no, north of Mexico, there haven't been black cats, melanistic cats in North America since 1921. Right?
Really?
Yeah. And see, these sightings are in England too, around Stonehenge and around it's the Beast of Exmoor, some of those things. And England's an island. There are no large cat species in England, but there are numerous sightings of these giant black cats. They call them alien big cats, ABCs. And here in the eastern United States, everybody's seen these black cats that are the length of the road, nose to tail, across a 2-lane highway.
Holy shit.
And that's the number one fucking sighting, dude, is that. I have hundreds of people. What do you see anything weird? Oh yeah, I saw one of those big black cats. And but see, there's an association between, in Forteana and in high strangeness research, black cats are associated with earthworks and portals, and this whole like people believe in vortexes and whatnot. That's a lot of people tie the sightings of these alien cats, alien in the sense that they're not indigenous to the area,
Yeah.
and there are simply zero black cats here. There no remains have ever been publicly found or released, but no statistics are kept. But it's the number one most common thing, and in the area where they're most seen in this county is up Highway 39 near where the Adena Mound is, where there is an earthwork. And so, is that a connection? Is it true that there's some type of portal kind of thing? So I don't know. But yeah, so that's really the most common thing that I would hear from people. Um, and so anyway, back to what Pamela was saying, though, she's telling us about this cult and that she was a part of, and like I was saying, it's easy to ask people about weird things they've seen, but when someone's telling you a very personal experience, where I mean, for her, it absolutely happened.
Yeah.
Whether you believe her or not, for her, she did suffer some trauma, right? It was pretty much textbook satanic ritual abuse,
Sure.
sort of the DSM-V, whatever their sort of take on it. But another woman in town had the same memories. We ended up interviewing 5 women that had this story. 2 of them, she and another woman we didn't interview the other woman, but she had spoken with her, and they had the exact same memories. They also had the exact same psychiatrist, therapist. So then I was like, well, that's that's a factor in this that we have to consider. And it's happening in like 1992 when these memories resurface. So then the question is, this is the tail end of the satanic panic. And all these psychiatrists were going around the country giving lectures to the police departments, telling them, how to talk to these people that have had these memories. So is that a factor? I don't know. But it almost doesn't matter because, when we ask her, where did this happen to you? She tells us the Mount Victory Mine, right? And the only reason we even asked her was because Greg was like, there's a cult here in town. This woman's, here are the emails. Look at these messages, which were just crazy. And that prompted us to return to Pamela and say, did you hear the word slough? And which is mentioned in Amy's messages. And she tears up. She starts to cry. Now, was it a trigger word? I don't know, but she responded to it for Kyle when he asked her about it. And that's when he said, well, where's this all happening at? And he even asked her about the little creature, did you see any little creatures? The whole Hellier sort of thing. The thing that Amy was, she says green man cult, but then, she backpedals and says little green men. That's always sort of a point of contention in Hellier. But anyway, so Pamela tells us that this is all happening at the Mount Victory Mine. And none of us had ever heard of this mine before. I didn't even know there was a mine here in Pulaski County. And we started digging. We started talking to the historians here in town. And what we found, and Kyle, I think, was the one that found the article. It was a New York Times article that said this man named Alexander Gaterma, who is the New York Times referred to as Mr. X because no one knew where he came from, that this guy, he was tied to the overthrow of the Dominican Republic with his Mutual Broadcasting Corp. He was the largest stock fraud manipulator up until 1959. And at one point, he was the president of 28. He was the CEO of 28 different companies. They're all shell companies, right? Yeah, it was just super weird. There was this connection. He was named in the Gemstone file as a co-conspirator in the JFK assassination, which was weird for us because the Warren Commission only had 7 men on it, and one of those men was from Somerset, Kentucky, John Sherman Cooper. You know, that was a strange coincidence.
Yeah, yeah.
But so here's this guy, this Mr. X, Alexander Gaterma. No one knew if he was Russian, if he was German. There were these undertones that he was a German or Nazi intelligence agent that had been brought over to the U.S. because of the Galen organization, right? He was tied to all these mob figures, Mo Dalitz, all these people. He was one of the owners of the Desert Inn, the first place that Frank Sinatra sang. And when they were setting off bombs, nuclear bombs in the desert, they had these atomic cocktail parties in the penthouse where they would sip cocktails and watch the atomic bombs go off, right? So there's this guy, right? Isn't that crazy? So here's this guy, Alexander Gaterma, that has this history built around him, who's this weird international man of mystery, and he bought the Mount Victory mine in 1975 from the most infamous attorney in Kentucky's history, Lester Burns Jr. And they even wrote a book about Lester Burns, and it was called Dark and Bloody Ground. And it's a famous crime novel where he was involved in representing some murderers and took some bloody money and laundered it, you know, as his fee. So anyway, he owned the mine. Well, then we find out, guess who Lester Burns' business partner was? We find out that it was Vice President Spiro Agnew owned the other part of the mine.
My God.
And so then I was like, is this real? But there are hundreds of newspaper articles about all this. Agnew ended up in a lawsuit over the mine after, and see what happens is, you know, so you've got Lester Burns, infamous attorney, the vice president of the United States. He raised the money to buy the mine on the campaign trail, the re-election campaign trail for Richard Nixon. Okay. Wow. And they raised the money in Japan and the Middle East, right? I mean, this is all, there are newspaper articles about all this, and I'm like, we're finding this, and I'm like, oh, holy shit, this is crazy. So they sold the mine to this Mr. X, and that's where these people are telling us, Pamela and other people are saying, there's an international cult performing magic, you know, she's saying sacrificing children, you know, and telling us this crazy story. And I'm like, this is, regardless of if any of what she's saying is true, this is really strange. You know, it's, and then no one remembered Alexander Gaterma, but all the articles talk about the fact that in 1975, when he bought the mine, he moved his entire financial empire to Somerset, Kentucky, and lived here in Somerset until 1977. He had a house in Boca Raton, you know, a house in Greenwich, but like they're very clear that he moved his operations, and he bought a house here on the lake, on Star Trek Drive, which I think is really funny. And it's a little it's a strange little like gated community thing of ultra rich people were living there in the 1970s, and so he really was living here, and in 1977 he was flying his family from Boca Raton to New York City to Madison Square Gardens for the circus, and he diverted his plane to Somerset, Kentucky, and was here for a few hours, did some business, no one knows what, and then flew out of Somerset, and his plane crashed in Brooklyn, killing him and his entire family except for one kid, and then that kid died in a plane crash 8 years later.
That's fucking, there's no way you can make that up.
Right? It's so like, it's so strange. And so at that point, you know, I've already dug in, like, you got the Kentucky Anomaly stuff, right? Yeah. Which is weird by itself. It's like, well, that's absolutely really strange. people are really violent here. You know, there's all these crazy fucking murders. You know, just tons of murders. There's these serial killer murders here. You know, they're burning people at the cave where they did the ritual in Hellier to summon Pan. They burned a guy alive outside that cave, immolated him. And it was probably related to drugs, but still a really strange unsolved. It's another one of the unsolved murders here.
Who's they?
Very
Who
high
did that?
profile. Well, who killed him?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh well, no one knows. It's an unsolved murder. I'm saying it was probably drug related, right? But but they found his car, they found his truck, and it's just like the two kids that were murdered. You know, again, it's unsolved. It's really strange, and that's what I kept finding were um, more and more of these strange stories about murders. And then you have, you know, the Hellier guys come in. They tell us they're being contacted by people from Somerset that are saying there's this cult here. And so, as I'm looking at all this stuff, you know, I'm a big fan of Walter Bosley and his Empire of the Will series. And if you've never checked that out before, it's about the 1914 murders in San Bernardino, California. And it turned there were all these weird murders, and it turned out that it was a group of spiritualists. They believe that's their theory. It was Walter Bosley and Richard Spence, and Richard Spence is in Pennyroyal. We interviewed him about this stuff. He's a major expert on espionage, you know, in the occult in America. History professor at Idaho, University of Idaho. But they wrote this book, the first book of the Empire of the Will series, about these murders, and it just kept tracking for me the strangeness of those murders matched up with what was happening here. And those murders were happening. Walter Bosley, once he started looking into those murders, he had mapped out where the murders were. He knew a guy that did these geomorphology maps of telluric currents and ley lines and things like that.
Yeah.
And the guy didn't know where the murders happened, didn't know any of that stuff. But Walter had him do a map for him. And when he did the map, the murders where the bodies were found all were on crisscrosses of the lines.
That's
so whoever
crazy.
Isn't that crazy?
Wow.
Whoever did it knew about, you know, this sort of mystical toponymy, you know, that this sort of like they were doing a ritual. And ultimately their theory involves a working to open the Panama Canal, right? But his point is there really was a weird, and I asked Richard Spence. Richard Spence doesn't believe any of this magic stuff, right? But he said it doesn't matter if you believe it or not. These people do believe it.
Yeah.
And they absolutely are doing shit based on those beliefs. And he was like, and I'm convinced after looking at all this evidence that there was a group that they did commit these murders, believing that it would open the Panama Canal now, you know, and cause the U.S. to become, you know, this bountiful place. So anyway, I was looking at all, you know, I was seeing the correlations there, and I started to wonder, you know, could there have been a group here that did do that, you know? And the Amy girl was in Hellier was telling Greg in the Hellier crew that there was a green man cult here that was doing all this stuff. And I thought that was crazy too. I was like, there is no way there's a green man cult here. Well, after Hellier came out and I was digging into all this stuff for Pennyroyal, I find that there's a group called the Guidonic Order, and they were founded in San Francisco in, I think, 1952, 1953. And they worship Sunernos, the horn god, Pan, the green man, right? And in 2004, they moved their international headquarters to, guess where? Somerset, Kentucky.
Somerset.
So from 2004 to 2014, the headquarters of a Green Man cult was here in Somerset. So then you got to wonder, did this Amy girl know someone that was part of the Guadonic Order? Um, there's the story in the show too. They taught, she says there's an elevator in one of the cabins, right? And so I'm talking to my next door neighbors, and it turns out, guess what? There is a cabin up there. And it turns out the cabin we found out later what her full name was, right? And it was easy to find her, and it was easy to find the articles and the address. And she and a group of other people were arrested for breaking into a cabin. And I was talking to our neighbors that told me about the murders originally, and they were interested in what I was researching. And I mentioned the cabin with the elevator, and they're like, "That's our great uncle's cabin." And I was like, "What?" And they said, "Yeah, it used to be stairs down into the basement. The basement was part of the cave system out there. It was a natural cavern, and they were using it to store food and sort of a natural root cellar. And originally, it was the metal staircase. And as they got older and couldn't go down the staircase, they installed a medical lift."
Wow.
So that cabin really does have, the ones you broke into, it really does have an elevator down into the cave system,
This is the same
which is
cabin
strange.
with the barred windows, and she found the teeth and the bones. And is that a different
She
cabin?
says no, the cabin does exist, and it does have bars and stuff on the windows because they're trying to keep people from breaking into the cabins because they're in the middle of nowhere, right? Now, I don't think she found any blood and that stuff, you know what I mean, and some of those things. No, I don't think so. No, I mean, I know the person that owns the cat. Once we started talking about it, he's a guy here that owns a lot of properties. And then I found out other stories from other people that knew the place exactly. Um, there's an element we talk about in the show too of like, was it drug induced, in a sense, like was she in an altered state, and that allowed her to pick up on this psychic residue,
Yeah. Yeah.
that kind of created those visions. But to me, it's just crazy that there was a Green Man cult, there is a cabin with the elevator, and probably the things got the weirdest though for us when Hellier came out, and they, I immediately jumped to my episode, just to see if I look like I'm crazy, in the interview. And um, the name of that episode was The Secret Commonwealth, which immediately for me, because I've been working with artist Dan Dutton so much, if anyone's listening to the show, the fourth episode is about Dan and sort of this encounter that he had in Elkhorn City with the archetype of Pan, and not in a paranormal sense, in a very like art sense. He's working on these operas, very intense, and there's this manifestation, this archetype he encounters, and his major work is a 4-part opera series that PBS filmed and showed all over the country, called The Secret Commonwealth. And now we know The Secret Commonwealth refers to Robert Kirkman's early book about fairies from like, what is it, 1600s or something, 1700s. There's that first sort of encyclopedia sort of thing, and it's The Secret Commonwealth. And definitely Dan was referencing that, but it was just strange that the episode that first really begins about Somerset is The Secret Commonwealth, and then by the time I saw right, it just meshes together, and then the final episode, they perform the ritual to Pan in the end, right? It's called The Night of Pan. And see, Dan and I were working on, once he told me the story of his encounter in Elkhorn City, I was like, we got to make that into a film and restage your opera in Elkhorn City in Break Center State Park and see if we can invoke Pan. And people don't realize that Hellier is a suburb of Elkhorn City. The when you look up Hellier, it's in Elkhorn City. That's its zip code. And so here's the Hellier crew, right? Here's Greg and Dana and the whole crew leaving Hellier, leaving Elkhorn City, coming to Somerset to do a ritual to Pan. And here Dana and I are going to Elkhorn City to do a ritual to Pan. And there was this weird, it's just, I was like, and I texted Greg and I was like, dude, what the fuck is this? This is insane, because I didn't know that that's what they were doing. And
Time-wise, how close together did those things take place?
let's see, their show, I started working on that with Dan in March. So we were filming the Fawn film and doing all the stuff with the Elkhorn City stuff in the spring. And then Hellier came out in November the 29th is the next point at which, and I even said to Greg, I was like, dude, I've been working with Dan Dutton. And he said to me, I'm sitting here looking at Dan Dutton on my evidence board. And we didn't mention him in the show because I didn't know how to relate all this stuff together.
Wow.
And so it was like, what is going on? And then they take into the fact too that, I learned this from Dan, that we're producing the Pennyroyal in a studio, the studio that I have for all the music video stuff and for all of our production with audio. Pure Grain Studios is above a distillery called Jarfly Brewing. And the symbol for the cult of Pan is cicada, the jarfly. Wow. So like all of this is happening in a place above, what the cultists of Pan wear.
That's amazing.
Which was another like, what's, and it just, things like that just kept heaping up, and then later we found out that there were other groups. We found out about the Bait Cabal that were from Cincinnati, who were a major influence on magic, ceremonial magic in America and Europe in the mid 1970s. They published the Cincinnati Journal of Ceremonial Magic, and they were coming from Cincinnati to that exact area where they did the ritual to Pan, where Gaterma's mine is, where all this crazy shit is happening, the Mount Victory mine, and where Greg and Dana and the crew did that ritual are right beside each other. And then we find out that this group of magicians who kind of changed magic in the 1970s, they were part of the Typhonian Order, the Kenneth Grant, sort of the Lovecraftian stuff. They believed in these old gods that were trying to penetrate into our dimension, which to me, once we got into this stuff, I'm like, this is science fiction. I mean, you're telling me a group of people came from Cincinnati to Somerset, to that same area that we're finding all this stuff, and they were performing time magic and vortex rituals to prevent elder intelligences from destroying the earth, right? That's the shit we're finding, and that what's her name, Nema, who was sort of the leader of this group, she's coming down to here to the Daniel Boone National Forest because they and Kenneth Grant believed that the Adena, the Adena and the Hopewell, the early paleo Americans, had opened this gateway, through their magic to the night side, and it had never been closed. And so it's called the Cincinnati Vortex, and it stretches from Cincinnati down into Kentucky and over into West Virginia. So like the Mothman, all of these things, they're all considered to be part of this Cincinnati vortex that was never properly closed and has allowed all of this strangeness to spill over into our reality, which is it's just, these people really believe this, and they were really coming here performing these rituals. So then you've got to think, is some of why is all of this concentrating here in this one spot? I mean, is it the Kentucky anomaly that's attracting people, or is that a part of all of this? I don't know, man. I mean, it's just the deeper I dug into it, and still yet, I'm working on the second season, and because there was so much stuff we couldn't fit in the first season, and
I'm sure
yeah, oh God, man, it was just such weird stuff. And it's like, why is all of this happening? And how have we become a part of it?
Exactly, which is kind of what towards the end of actually the last episode of the season, you talk about, observing things. Once you observe things or you start to dig a little further, you start participating in it. So you start calling it forth in a sense, and it becomes a sort of a two-way conversation. Although in this sense, it's like a 16,000-way conversation. There's so much happening and so many weird intersections with all this stuff going on. It's so odd.
That's the thing about this too, is like, take it, when I started structuring the story so that we could tell this story, it really is one of those things that it stacks on top of each other. And it's like, you could take away lots of it, but there's so much of it that's still there, and so many weird, that's the strange, it's like, I always say this to Darian, and Kyle, who helped me produce the show, that it's as if we're seeing a feature of reality somehow. There are too many what people would call synchronicities or meaningful coincidences, but I think it's even beyond that. It's a structure. We're seeing the way that these things are connected to each other, and there's no way that it's random, right? They are part of some type of structure. I don't think it's paranormal. I really don't think it's paranormal. I do think that it is, that we simply don't understand how time and space and our consciousness and all of these things come together to form what is our experience of life in reality, and recently too, there's been a lot of talk about, and I've never researched any of this stuff, and now that I have, I've been digging even deeper into it. But I think it was the Rejected Religion podcast did like a roundtable about and religious studies, and they talked about Hellier and pennyroyal, and about why people believe the things they believe. And one of the experts that they had on there was talking about hyperstition. And I don't know if you've had anyone on your show talk about hyperstition.
I've never even heard the term.
And see, I was unfamiliar as well. There was he's a very controversial figure named Nick Land, and he was a philosopher in England, and he formed a group called the CCRU, and it was at the University of Warwick. I forget what it's something cybernetic research unit. But it has it's a cybernetic research unit is the thing. And they were writing about reality and hyperstition, and they came up with this concept of fictions that become realities through the interaction of observers. And so people observing the fictions, especially they cite Burroughs, William Burroughs is a big part of this, and these ideas of like the Titanic, and the fact that someone wrote a book, that was about the Titanica, 13 years before the Titanic sinks. And the thing that they're describing in the book is the exact dimensions of the Titanic. That's one of those famous stories where you're like, a fictional story was written 13 years prior to this. Then that event happened, right?
Yeah.
That's an example of a hyperstition. It's a fiction that became a reality. So their theories were that through intention and chaos magic and cybernetics and second order cybernetics, which again, when we were, this all, I only found out about this stuff in the last couple of months, and so we were talking about second order cybernetics and how that relates to the pennyroyal mystery in the final episode, and it really gets to the pennyroyal mystery through Stephen Snyder and this parapolitical researcher and this whole backstory of research from the prior 2 years. And then I find that these other people are already researching this, and they're saying that observers and that reality is observational, and that people through intent and through observation can manifest fictions, and also through their observation of a fiction cause it retroactively to become real. That in the past now that event actually happened, and it's way out there stuff, and I think it's having a resurgence again. Especially with like the sigil engine and some of these digital occult things that are reemerging. That's exactly what these guys were talking about in the 1990s, in the early 2000s. They're saying, the occult and technology are going to merge, and we're going to see these strange effects, these cybernetic magical effects transpire. And so in that sense, it's like, is that what pennyroyal is? Is the fact, because I always say to people, if we had never looked at that mine, right? If we had never taken a look at that and found out about Alexander Guterma, that mine would have always been a hole in the ground, forgotten to time, right? But we looked at it, we observed it, and now it's going to become this mythical place that's tied to Alexander Guterma, that's tied to these cults, that's tied to these magical groups, even the Kentucky Anomaly. And so it's recontextualized. Even the Alexander Guterma story, with all of these other things we found, it's now recontextualized. And the more people that observe this story and the more people that become a part of this story, it's almost as if the more it becomes real and the more that it changes. I mean, it is a real thing, but really what we're observing is, we don't, Alexander Guterma wasn't part of the cult. I don't think there was a cult. I really don't think there was. But at the same time, if you look at all of this stacked together, you're like, well, come on, it looks like there might have been a cult there, and he was a part of it, and all these things just line up together. Do they line up together to say that's what happened, or is it stranger that they all line up, in this weird way that it's almost like a wave function, right, in quantum physics. And it's like, it's an uncollapsed wave function. And it's all of these possibilities, and they're superimposed on top of each other. And they're not going to collapse until we find the reality of it, the answer to the mystery, right? But while we don't have that answer, all of those things sort of coexist and then create this information structure,
Well, there's a lot of overlap. There's so many different layers and so many things going on. It's easy to there's lots of opportunities to make connections that may or may not be there. But there certainly does seem to be a lot of connections on, I'm coming at all of this through your podcast. So in a sense, that is my lens that I'm looking at this through. So you came with your own lens when you approached all this information. So it's interesting to take those things into account.
Yeah. I mean, for me, that's really what the story has become is this examination of, it's the same thing with the folklore. This has created new folklore here in town, that people are sort of onboarding to and repeating. It's as a folklorist, I'm not a folklorist, but definitely I love to study folklore and collect folklore. A friend of ours is a folklorist, and she had the question for me. She was like, how do you justify becoming part of the story that you were trying to tell? Right. And she was like, because that crosses a line for a folklorist, because now you're the one that's helping to generate this folklore, and that you can't do that. You can't be the person studying the folklore and then also the person that's part of the folklore. But that's where you get this whole sort of second order cybernetics, where you're both the observer, but then the system itself is observing you, observing the system. And to me, that aspect of it, which ultimately is what hyperstition is, which I didn't know at the time, until I started reading some of the work of the CCRU, which I do recommend people take a look, because it is fascinating. It's just another one of those avenues where it's like all of these things are related in some way. People are using different words, different terms. A lot of the people that you've interviewed, are talking about this same thing, but it's just a different angle. Like you said, it's a different lens that we're looking at the same phenomena, you know. And you know, for Greg and Dana and the Hellier crew, they came at it from a whole other perspective, you know, and what they're seeing. You know, I think that they've definitely look at that, even that phenomena of people feeling like they're personally a part of that, right? A huge community has grown around that. And so you wonder, is it, you know, in the show they talk about it in terms of initiation, you know, and it's like, are they being initiated? Are all of these people initiating it? But to me, it's like an information structure, you know, and it's the second order cybernetics thing. It's like you keep bringing more and more observers, and the level of complexity continues to increase. But these people are having these synchronicities because they're, you know, the system itself is feeding back, you know. And so the more that you look, it's just like anything, the more that you try to observe things, the more that you'll see these synchronicities, you know. It's like when you walk down the street and you pass someone, you take note of that person, and you walk back the other way and you pass the same person at almost the same spot, right? And you're like, wow, that seems auspicious, right? But you would have never noticed that had you not taken note, you know.
Absolutely. There seems to be to me, kind of an undeniable layer of intent behind all this, though. I think if we were, say, a bunch of different people at different times stumbled upon on their hike in the forest, let's say, and they stumble upon this tree that's on fire, and several different people encounter it, and they go back and they recount their experience, and they all have a different take on it. But the thing behind all of these different phenomena that are going on in this series of events that occur in this whole conglomeration, there's a big element of things and people and situations being drawn in to this. So, you know, the guy from Hellier, his name is slipping my mind. Greg, is that his name?
Yeah, Greg. Yeah,
yes.
Yeah.
You mentioned something about the sleeping entity. Excuse me, the sleeping entity that's sucking everybody into this vortex. And there's also mention of the meteor and all of the quartz crystals that are in the area, all drawing things in. So there seems it's easy to perceive that there's something behind it, but perhaps that's just another element that added to this already complex conglomeration of phenomena makes it seem that way. It's hard to say. There's so many different directions to look.
For me, again, always this will be the pan stuff is definitely personally the most insane thing. Like also off the air, I will tell you something that's really really crazy.
Okay.
That most people don't know, just because it's one of those things where you're like, what? Holy shit, you know. But just for personal safety and identity, because originally too, when Hellier came out, we got myself and my family got doxxed because of what I'll tell you about. But on Reddit, yeah. But I didn't even know about it. Someone told me. They were like, dude, your shit was all over the place, and I was like, what?
Wow.
You know? But anyway, it ended up getting removed even before I found out about that. But but it's because it's so strange. When I tell you, you'll understand why people were like, what? You know, this can't be possible, but it is. And that's the thing about a lot of this, you know, some of the stuff that we haven't talked about are those things that are extremely personal details that are related to all this, that are just it's just astonishing, you know. But the connections with like Dan Dutton and Pan, the stuff with Oakwood too, for me, like this shit was already extremely weird. And I love mysteries and I love high strangeness. And it was one of those things where it was like, okay, we're involved in a weird situation. You know what I mean? Like, I love this. This is really strange. And all these things were stacking up. And I really did not think it could get any stranger. And I'd talked to Marco Visconti, you know, who's in Pennyroyal, ceremony magician in England. He's become a great friend and a great authority on magic, you know, because I don't practice magic, and that was the thing, you know. Derry and Kyle, we don't practice any magic, so this is all just totally new to us, you know, and that aspect of the story, you know, because again, what are the odds that all these magical groups are coming here? You know, there was this structure here in that area where the mine. Also, there are all these there are tunnels underneath Somerset,
Yes. Hmm.
right? Tons of tunnels, and then there's this. It's the 13th largest cave system in the U.S. The Sloan's Valley Cave System, and it's like all of that's so nuts. This because that's a weird subterranean motif
Yeah.
that also exists underneath all this.
And
And
the
then when you
mines
mix in
too.
the whole and the yeah, exactly, the
Yeah.
mines. Yeah, yes, yeah, the mines. And then you get into this whole Kenneth Grant and the Typhonian Order. Again, I wasn't familiar with any of this stuff until we really started to research this. And you know, the tunnels of Set are a major thing in Kenneth Grant's writings. Well, what's nuts is Somerset changed its tourism name. Its you know whole campaign is hashtag see my set, which I think is crazy because of
What?
all of the whole yeah, dude. It's see my set.
That's
And so
weird.
there are all these weird connections to the Temple of Set in Crowley stuff, you know, all this stuff, and the tunnels of Set with Kenneth Grant, the Typhonian Order, Nema, the Bait Cabal. They're coming here. The Bait Cabal. They also were their symbol was the bee, and I find out that there was this structure here in that area of the you know where the mine is, where the caves, all that stuff, and it was called the Beehive. And these groups in the 70s and 80s were coming here, and people, I interviewed all these people. They were like, oh yeah, those people around the Beehive, they'd all be naked in circles. They were skyclad doing these rituals. But these people were just, yeah, they're a bunch of hippies getting naked, standing in the pond on that property. And it was a weird actual ritual structure. It's still here. We could drive to it today, you know? And I find you just keep finding all of this stuff out, and it's like, what's going on? But the Oakwood stuff, though, back to that, you know, when I didn't think any of this could get weirder, and then I brought up Oakwood and mentioned, you know, to Marco Visconti some of the Oakwood stuff, and he said Pan is the Oakwood king, you know, which was a weird connection. So I'm telling Dan that, you know, we're working on the Fawn film, and I mentioned, oh yeah, you know, Marco told me about, you know, the I told him about all the stuff, and he said the Pan's the Oakwood King, and that's when Dan said, well, I've got an Oakwood story for you, and tells me about being convinced to go paint with the cottage of savants in 1979, and then not having any memory of what happened. So Oakwood, what's crazy is that Dateline came here in 1973 because the Vietnam War was going on. All this stuff happened in the 1970s. There's this clustering of events in the 1970s, which I haven't fully understood yet. You know, I mean, this is definitely part of our research, but um, definitely the Vietnam War was going on. All of these people were coming back from the Vietnam War. Their newspaper articles go into detail about this, about the fact that the mental health industry in the U.S. was just in disarray. Guys were coming back, PTSD. You know, just they didn't know how to handle it at the time, and the mental health industry just looked barbaric. Basically, it just looked horrible, and they decided to create this experimental health facility here in Somerset, Kentucky, of all places. And they were going to do a new type of therapy. And it was supposed to be, I actually found out from someone who knows the architects, it was supposed to be built in the desert out west, the original design. And that's why all the buildings are sunk down into the ground. So they're partially submerged with these sloping roofs, each of the cottages, so that if there were winds from the desert, it would minimize that. They kept the same design when they built it here in
Interesting.
Kentucky, right? And it's true. I mean, you can immediately see it. If I were to take you there right now, you'd be like, "This is nuts, Nathan." You know, if you look at it from above, anybody can do this on Google Earth. It looks like a giant sigil. It is the craziest outline, right? But it was this experimental health facility, and it was the flagship in America to prove that mental health in the US was turning a corner for the good, right? And so there are all these news stories about this. So they send Dateline here in 1973 to do an expose about how this is going to change the face of therapy in America. They film all of it. They even hired Malcolm, Malcolm Greer, who is from Somerset. He's one of the most famous graphic designers in the corporate world. Like most of the corporate logos of the Fortune 500 companies are designed by Malcolm Greer. He teaches at the Rhode Island School of Design, and he is from Somerset, Kentucky. Okay. So all of these symbols that we all see, right, are from this guy.
Sigils.
He wins a bid to to do all of the interior and exterior symbolism and design of this new mental health facility that the government is sponsoring. Finds out it's in his hometown, which there's a whole news story about that where he's like, holy shit, this is in Somerset. Dateline comes, they film it. They even had a dragon built in the lobby that the children could make offerings to by feeding it to get their wishes. There's a whole article about that. And they were punished if they acted out of line, they weren't allowed to feed the dragon. Right. And so you're reading this, and of course I'm reading this thinking, shit. This is like a cult, you know.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
of course the article's treating it as if it's just something funny, you know, like
Yeah. Isn't it cute?
you know? Yeah, isn't that cute? And I'm like, and then you look at what Malcolm designed of the whole place, and it is absolutely bizarre, right? So so anyway, so Oakwood opens up. Dateline does the shoot 6 weeks after Dateline leaves. They haven't aired the show yet. An anonymous letter comes in, and it's from an employee at Oakwood. It goes to the governor of Kentucky, the head of the state police of Kentucky, the sheriff here in town, and the mayor. No one has ever seen the letter. We only know the contents of the letter because the state of Kentucky sent the health commissioner to Oakwood, and they had a press conference, and the health commissioner outlined a response to each of the things in the letter, each of the allegations in the letter. So you can kind of glean what the letter said, but no one's ever seen it. I have filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the state of Kentucky. We'll see. I actually did last Wednesday. I did one with the FBI for Gaterma, and last Wednesday I received 1,662 pages of
Wow.
FBI files on Alexander Gaterma.
Holy shit.
And they responded in 28 days. And I was like, this is because I sent it off and I was like, there's no way I'll never get a response about this, you know? And yeah,
that's amazing.
So now we have all those documents. It's crazy, dude, the shit that's in there. So anyway, I'm hoping that we'll have the same success from the Oakwood stuff. But so this letter basically alleges that there was a witch cult. And that's what's so crazy, you know. We're finding all this stuff about cults and all these things. Apparently, the newspaper says a witch cult was performing rituals in the tunnels underneath Oakwood that connect the cottages together, and that they were doing seances and summoning rituals, and they were burning symbols into the backs of the residents.
And taking their medication too, right?
Yes, yeah, and doing heavy amounts of drugs, psychedelics, you know, and see, that's an element of this too. This idea of were these people tapping into this subterranean undercurrent, this sort of darker element? Were they opening up portals, with their consciousness that were bringing these things through. But remember, this is happening in 1973. And there were, I think, 24 cottages or 12 cottages. I forget the number exactly, but one of those cottages, most of the people there were low functioning, right? Most of the residents were low functioning, but one cottage was high functioning and had the savants, everyone in there. And those in 1973, they're mentioned that there's one cottage of savants. We even interviewed the son, the local historian here in town, is here in town because his father was the director that took over Oakwood once they fired everybody. And the guys that were in charge they had beards, they wore beads, dressed in saris. It was the Esalen Institute sort of thing, right? And they were even reprimanded by the state of Kentucky for dressing unprofessionally. And they were doing all of these like weird magical things here. And then these savant kids that we know were here in 73, in 79, the people taking care of them are telling Dan that they're extra dimensional beings that have possessed these 9 children and are trying to communicate through her and to other people that are taking care of them how to save humanity. And she wants Dan to come paint with them. And then when he goes to paint with them, the last thing he remembers is seeing these people on their hands and knees eating popcorn out of the grass with their mouths. And that's it. 3 hours later, he's being driven back to his house. He has no memory of it too. And he didn't even know he forgot that memory until I started talking to him, and it just came back to him. And I've talked to Dan for years, and he was shaken in that moment because it was like, he's an artist that creates memory palaces. His operas literally deal with memory and time and how to remember things and how to embody memory. And so here he is talking to me, and suddenly he has a gap in his memory that he literally can't access. And it scared him. It was weird. And I couldn't believe he was telling me this story. Plus, he was confirming he didn't know that I'd interviewed these other people talking about these savants. He didn't call them savants. He just said there were these people in this one cottage that this woman was telling me was inhabited by these extra dimensional intelligences. And I'm like, holy shit, this is this is crazy. And that was like on top of all this other weird shit. So then after I found out the bait cabal stuff, all this other stuff, I'm like, were these people doing rituals? Did they summon something? Were the rituals under Oakwood? Like, we know they were doing rituals in the tunnels under Oakwood because of the newspaper articles, and the investigation. God, if we get those records of the Oakwood stuff.
Oh, man.
Who knows, man? And I wonder now, it's like, now will they even, if I ask for them, people won't even know what's in there. They'll just be like, oh, he wants what? So, okay, let's just copy those papers. They won't look deeper and say, holy shit, there's some weird stuff in here. Hopefully they won't even think about it. But it's also the state of Kentucky, so we probably won't get anything, But, it's still worth asking. But we still have all these newspaper articles, and it's just weird, man. Just on top of everything, I'm like, why is this part of the story? And how does this factor in? And see, Dan said that day that he encountered whatever those people were, right? Because he thought she was crazy. He was like, this woman is fucking on LSD. It's the 70s. And then he goes there, and now he has screened memories. His brain is blocked. He doesn't know what happened, but he came back to Dandyland, his farm that he makes all of his art on. And that afternoon, after that happened, is when he received all of the inspiration for the Secret Commonwealth, the Fawn, all of those things came that afternoon, and it set off the rest of his work for the next 3 decades. So then it's like, what happened in 1979 with him? Because obviously me interacting with him about the Fawn, it's like, was something set in motion then that's been affecting things now? Or is something retroactively happening now because we're also focused, and so many other observers are focusing on this story? Is it somehow looping back to influence him and these things then? I don't know. I'm just saying it's just so fucking weird, man. Like, I don't know.
That's amazing. I like that take on it. Absolutely. There's so many overlaps. There's the overlap of all these different subterranean tunnels, mines, caves. There's the overlap of all the cults. There's the overlap of trauma and children. So what? I mean, and then the pan. Of course, the pan overlaps. Like, what's going on at those intersections? I wonder. Like, then there's the finders too. I mean, that's yeah.
Dude, so I totally forgot about that. So, we're interviewing that remote viewer that I met through Reddit. She or they had said that they had remote viewed Somerset, didn't know anything about it, and had this weird encounter. And then they were, while we were interviewing them, they'd mentioned that about the finders. So I look into the finders, and obviously that's a super strange story with those CIA documents, right? But it says in those documents that they were stopping in Berea, which is 15 miles from Somerset, right? It's like they were here in this area, and the lake's here. So what are the odds that if they had a house in Berea, that they wouldn't have stopped on? I mean, it doesn't matter. They were still within, minutes of
Yeah.
where the mine is,
Sure.
where all this stuff's happening. And to me too, that was one of those things where I was like, this is weird. I haven't found anything that actually directly connects the finders here, except that they were like 15, 20 miles away. And it says they were stopping here in Kentucky, and it was the stopping point between, was it Michigan and Florida. And I don't know, man. Somebody also pointed out to me too that the community that they were in Berea, there's a guy that went, oh, man, I just now remembered this, and I haven't looked at this stuff in a while. The dude they were staying with is an esoteric guy, like an occult guy, and he was building houses that were laid out in a special way for like it was some type of occult practice in the design. And there's a book of his designs, and people have studied to try to understand. It was a cult, not the Finders cult, but another dude with a spiritual movement and the way they were building houses. And that's where the Finder group was staying. And that was in Berea that guy existed. And it's a whole other story. So it's like, because what Amy describes in Hellier really does match up with the FBI documents. I mean, have you ever looked at the Finders documents before? Because
I haven't. No.
They're totally nuts, and they're publicly available. Just hop on there and you can, on the CIA's website, you can read it. And she's describing chains and computer equipment and files and all this stuff, and the scene that they're depicting in Washington D.C. at the warehouse maintained by the Finders had computers and documents and all this stuff. And I don't know, man. It's just another one of those elements that you throw in the mix. It's not even, germane to the central story, but it's another just like what could it possibly mean? Is it related? Is it not related? Does it matter if it's related? Is it just simply another shade of this? You know what I mean? That there is this thing, and it's casting these shadows, and that's just another one of the shadows. That there is a shape.
Yeah, the shape. That's a good way of putting it. It's like a replication of that dynamic of cult, organizations and cults. And so going just for a second back to Pamela Richards and her story, what was your take on that? Did you buy that, or did you think that was something implanted by her psychologist or psychoanalyst?
I've never really answered it because I've just taken great care to not. I don't ever want to offend Pamela.
Of course, of course,
because I definitely uh, her sharing that story again, that was the most ethically, the thing for me was, do we release this? Do we not release this? You know, again, I was very cognizant of the fact that it was part and parcel satanic ritual abuse. You know, I mean, the story she's telling is replicated by thousands of witnesses. That's the problem, though, is that all of the stories are the same. You know, in the sense that
to a certain degree.
Yeah, to a certain degree, but ultimately, like, there's a formula to it. You know, and in that sense, it's like, you know, you're talking about body parts being thrown into a lake or into the mine, she's saying. And it's like, if that many children were going missing and being cut up, and, you know, not to sound, you know what I'm saying, but it's just what she's describing to us, you know, and if these things were happening, there would be evidence, right? Someone would find those things. You know, because that was my question to her was, well, if they're taking all these children, people, you know, Somerset would be, you know, if two children went missing, there would be a problem. You know, I mean, people wouldn't let their kids out of their houses, you know. And that's when she said, no, they're taking them from 4 different states and then bringing them here. Mm-hmm. You know,
unless they're feeding something,
right.
That's in the cave,
you know. Right, you know. So yeah, I don't know, you know, but I guess the weirdest thing of her story, that we didn't put a lot of the stuff from the interview in there. She was very detailed in the rituals, like her memories of what happened. She started to draw the scenes of what had happened as well. I absolutely believe that she experienced trauma of some sort, you know. You know, is it possible that it transpired, those memories of that trauma, you know, were sort of the basis of these memories? I don't know, you know. Again, it's one of those things where, at face value, I would say just it's satanic ritual abuse syndrome, right? And that these are false memories, right? But you can't deny the fact that the place she's talking about, there's an international cult. This weird dude buys it, right? And then I've spoken to 4 other women with the same memories, and even one of the women was telling us that this was happening 5 years ago, right? That she was at one of these things, and you know, it's like, I don't know. I mean, definitely, I found and confirmed that there are magical groups coming here. You know, there definitely were the Bait Cabal, the Guadonic Order. You know, there are others, and so definitely people practicing rituals and ceremonial magic were here. But I mean, her story is so detailed. You know, it's just so detailed, and I don't know. I mean.
In light of groups like the Finders, where there are tons of, I mean, obviously you stated it's on the FBI website. There's absolute evidence that something like that exists. Wouldn't it be interesting and convenient to have the satanic ritual abuse screen memory put in place of something traumatic, equally as traumatic, that actually happened, and then we can chalk it up into the syndrome? I'm not saying that's what you're doing, but I'm just throwing that out there, like, maybe something like that is happening. Who fucking knows?
Yeah. I know.
As a cover up.
Man. Right.
Yeah.
Well, see, that's so the. And again, I'm not saying Oakwood was part of. Oakwood still exists, right? Everything in case anyone from Oakwood listens to this, because they're privately owned now. I'm not saying that Oakwood is, you know, harboring any type of aliens or,
of course,
abusing anyone or doing anything. Mm-hmm. Historically, and definitely fact in the newspaper, the cult stuff happened, right? The witch cult. It's 100%. It did happen. What also happened there was that a boy was found dead in a pond a mile from Oakwood. He was a resident, and he was terrified of water. He couldn't even take a bath at the facility, and they find him in a pond. You know, that was strange. You know, again, like I said, you know, you take things like that, the Oakwood stuff, the deaths at Oakwood, the murders of Linda and Cody, the Kevin Price is the other murderer, he was burned alive and immolated. And there are other ones, you have Sammy Ketron being assassinated. I mean, the list is insane. Like, once you start listing this out, there are so many murders and strange murders here that go all the way back into the early 1900s that it's hard to not. And like you said, with the finders, even with the San Bernardino stuff, I think Walter Bosley's point was, and other people have made this point, if there are groups that are doing these things, there isn't a time limit set on this. Groups exist for decades, centuries. The people, just the members, fluctuate. And so is it possible that, starting in the 70s, even earlier, something was happening? I don't know. But, Oakwood, at the time in 73 that this happened, MK Ultra was winding down, right? And it was exposed, I guess, during Nixon, I guess during the Watergate stuff, it had come out. So it's right in the same time period. I think that was 74. This is 73 that it opens and the scandal happens. One of the only publicly acknowledged MK Ultra facilities revealed in the documents that the government, that they had hearings about, was in Lexington, Kentucky, 90 miles north of Somerset. And it was they called it the narcotics farm. And it was a prison, but people could check themselves in. And there were a lot of blues singers and jazz singers and writers. I think William Burroughs even checked himself in there. And they gave you drugs, like that was part of your therapy, was these drugs they were giving you. And that is the guy that ran that program was one of the first people that Sidney Gottlieb hired as part of the MK Ultra program. So from whatever it was, 63 to 73, or maybe even 1950, whatever it was, maybe the late 50s, that it started up, this guy in Lexington, Kentucky, 90 miles north of us, was doing this. And, we've always had the question, because most of the psychologists in the state came from Lexington to Somerset to consult at Oakwood. So this weird stuff's happening. It's an experimental, mental health facility 90 miles north of us is an MK Ultra flagship program that's acknowledged by the government as happening, one of only like 3. There were many more, but definitely that one was one of the ones that, it happened in Lexington. It's that they used that in the hearings, that look at this, they kept a number of guys that were prisoners there on LSD for like 150 days or something like that, something crazy, but anyway, but my point is there a relationship with that? Is some of what we're finding that's so strange, not the synchronicity stuff, but just this darker element, is it somehow related to that and sort of the ripples from that have affected people here, children, grandchildren, that something was going on, and even Amy, that contacted Greg and Hellier, that somehow, all of this is tied into something less paranormal and more human, that there's a human element. And I think that was what Richard Spence's take on it is that, hey, is it likely that these alien intelligences were contacting these kids, or that there were, government agents testing things on these kids, or beaming things into people's brains through hearing aids? I mean, the thing at Oakwood definitely has shades of the Nine. You're familiar with,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Andrea Puharich and the Nine.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Puharich invented hearing aid technology. He had a company that you could beam audio from a laser beam into anyone's ear It was part of this whole thing he was developing. He has a patent on it, right? And so Richard Spence is like, is it likely that Puharich, who's involved in these channeling sessions where people are receiving messages from the Nine, right, are actually talking to extra dimensional intelligences, or is the guy that is inventing this technology beaming this shit into these people's brains as part of a government program, right? But as those words come out of my mouth, it sounds incredibly conspiratorial and
Well,
crazy. You know what I'm saying? Like,
it's sometimes conspiracies do take place. I mean, I think it's easy for somebody who's conspiratorial minded to see them everywhere, but it's undeniable. There are groups of people that get together and plot shit and act them out on the unwary masses or groups of people. It happens. Conspiracies happen every once in a while.
That's the thing too. I've tried to keep the pennyroll story very, I want to say, try to keep it light. Obviously, we talk about a lot of like child murder and stuff,
Yes.
But I'm just saying, it was never my intent to, like I mentioned at the beginning of the interview too. It's like, you can see how I was concerned by presenting this story, which, we were working on this prior to the QAnon stuff. And I was like, oh my God, this is just like, these guys are going to jump all over this and be like, see, this is evidence, there are kids in the caves, which misses the point of, which I think misses the point of whatever this is, right? That there is something happening here, whether it's tied to the Kentucky Anomaly, or if it's tied to some government program, or whatever it is, if it's magical groups, whatever the thing is, and maybe it's all those things in a way. But there is undeniably a concentration of strangeness here in this one place. And somehow it has absolutely infected our lives and contaminated our existence in a weird way. I mean, the ways that our lives, Dan and I intersect, there are things we haven't talked, Darian, like everybody that's been involved in this, and it continues to play out in this really strange way, but it also at the same time in this really beautiful way. It's just something too. Once we get off the air, I've got to show you that will absolutely, like, I want to tell you one thing that's going to blow your mind, which I mentioned earlier. I'm going to show you something else that you're going to be like, are you fucking kidding me? Because it's just, it's like once we began to interact with all of this, it's proliferated. And again, I don't even know if it's paranormal. I really am not sure it is paranormal, that it is just something about the way that we exist and the way that the world exists and the way that we perceive it, and some people call it magic, and some people call it quantum mechanics, and some people call it, whatever, spirituality, religion, belief, faith, all these things, they all factor into whatever this thing is that we don't currently understand. And we're interacting with it. It's interacting with us it's almost and again, I'm not trying to take away from the weird, dark parts of this, but in a almost playful way, right? Because there are so many times that I've laughed at the absurdity of the discovery of these certain things, right? Where it happens, and I'm like, this is ridiculous, right? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
it
absolutely.
exists, like, I mean, it's verifiable. Anyone can look any of this stuff up, but it's like, well, what does it mean? What's it trying to tell us, right? What's it trying to tell me? Let me be, sort of solipsistic in a sense, what's all of this trying to tell me? And I have zero fucking idea. And it's both exciting and exhilarating and absolutely fucking terrifying in a Lovecraftian way, in the sense that it's like, how could we possibly understand what our relationship is to this? You know what I mean? On a personal level, because in a way, it's like, if you're related to this at all, it's so cosmic that you really do feel minuscule, that you're a symptom, you're just another effect of whatever this thing is, and that has that sort of cosmic horror element to it of how could we possibly understand this, and if we did, how would we not go fucking mad, and I don't know. I mean, again, I try to keep it very playful and very light, and that's what I tell the boys. We're researching this, and I'm like, I don't know. Who knows? What let's just roll with this and be like, this is weird. I just found out some stuff too. I'm going to tell. This is one other thing I'll tell you off the air, but it's going in the second season, but it's absolutely like, holy shit. I told Dan earlier tonight and everybody, and they were just like, what? And it's just another thing 2 days ago that I uncovered that I was like, what is this? How is this even fucking possible? And
I can't wait to hear it. Are there things that you can tell the listeners, sort of on the last leg here, of things that have happened or manifested or been put into motion from the podcast getting released?
Yeah. The weirdest thing has been the appearance of the signs, right? And so I guess it was a week, 2 weeks after. Well, first a strange thing happened that the day that the podcast came out, the city of Somerset announced that they were building a college here in Somerset, right? On top of Cundiff Square, which is where there's a pyramid in the center of town, okay? In the 1970s, this guy named C.K. Cundiff erected this giant pyramid with an eagle on top and an all-seeing eye.
Holy shit.
And called it the Great Seal Monument. And he traveled to Egypt. This is in the newspaper. He wrote his own article. He went to fucking Egypt and climbed the Great Pyramid and received a vision to come back to Somerset and erect this pyramid, this monolith thing, right? And
wow,
that's strange, right? He's a Freemason. Very prominent Freemason here in town. And that's the thing too. This town is a complete Freemason town. The entire town is laid out based off of and I'm not one for Freemason conspiracy theories. You know what I mean? Like, the Freemason conspiracy theories are the old boy network theory that everybody that's in power, props their friends up. These guys were wearing skirts and talking, saying a bunch of weird words. You know what I mean? But like, it's the old boy network. The powerful are helping benefit the powerful,
for sure.
But definitely these dudes, the First and Farmers Bank, which basically lent everybody the money to build this town, all the board of directors were all Freemasons. It was even called a Freemason bank. This is one of the oldest lodges in America, 111, which is one of the most particularly special numbers of the Freemasons, is 111. It's the guardian of the gate, Aleph, 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 right? And that was Sammy Catron, who was assassinated at the fish fry, the sheriff.
Oh yeah,
he was a Freemason, and his patrol number was 111, right? Which is strange,
Yeah.
And this was the fourth Masonic college in America was erected here, right? So the college that's being built here bought Cundiff Square where the pyramid is, and they're tearing it down and building a college that is based on, and this is according to their website, everybody can look this up, according to the Freemason principles on which this town and that original college was founded. This will be a Freemason college for the new generation.
Wow.
And also that it will seek to educate people, seek to build the army against the radical left that has poisoned the country.
Interesting.
And I was like, what? You know, Dan's Dutton's take on this, which was great, was like, see, Nathan, those are the Apollonian forces, and they're battling the Pan forces. And because famously, Apollo and Pan were in a competition with music, and Apollo, who is order, who you might even argue is fascism, right? Extreme order, right? Apollo had an orchestral, very formed music, you know, as his offering. And then Pan created, famously, country music. That is the creation of country music, is in that challenge. And Pan defeated Apollo, right? So Dan was like, see, Nathan, we're living on the front lines of the battle between Apollo and Pan, right? Which I thought was funny, you know.
That's great.
But it's weird that there are so many elements of that keep popping up here.
Yeah, no shit. So the signs.
But so anyway, so that all happened. So they announced that college the day the show came out, which again everybody was like, that's weird, you know. They didn't know anything about the show. I'm just saying it's just a funny coincidence.
Yeah, of course.
But like a week, I think it was 1 week after the show came out, this woman walks up in the middle of downtown, middle of the day. It was like noon. The sheriff's department is across from the bar where the studio is, right? It's like Jarfly Brewing. We're upstairs, and then the sheriff's department. I can see it from my window, and this woman walks right up and has a pre-made sign and just puts up this sign that says, "This town is a cult. Call the FBI." It mentions Lester Burns Jr., which is in the podcast. It mentions Sammy Catron, which is in the podcast. Like all these things in the podcast, right? And the sheriff's department, they take it down. Over the next 2 weeks, I think it was 6 more signs appeared all over town. And not from her, but from other people. There were like, it was a woman and 2 different men were putting these signs all over town that were making reference to the story we were telling and telling everyone to call the FBI. And so the final thing that happened was one of these people climbed on top of an abandoned house on the main street that drives you into Somerset. And on top of the roof, they spray painted in gigantic letters, "This town is a cult. Call the FBI. The lawyers, politicians, and cops are involved. The cyber terrorists have taken over everyone's minds. Please help us." And so the city of Somerset a couple weeks ago tore that house down.
Holy shit. Was it an empty house?
It was an empty house. It was an empty house, but it was like, but anyway.
Did you get a picture of it?
Oh, I'll send you all these.
Okay, cool.
It's crazy, dude. They're crazy. Read the sign. The signs are talking about like the Truman Show, reality, and I'm like, what's happening? You know, like, but then it's, you know, a part of the show too. We were talking about schizophrenia and the way that possibly, you know, schizophrenics, certain filters are turned off, right? And so they may be receiving, you know, we're all receiving tons of information, but we have filters up. Right. And some of those filters are damaged or they're off. More information's coming in. So it's like, is what we're broadcasting, is this story we're broadcasting getting picked up? Because the people that put these signs up absolutely did not listen to this show. You know, the cops, I talked to the cops and they're like, no, we know who's doing it. They're just crazy. It's like, are they? Because what they're putting on the fucking signs are in our podcast. It's the shit that's being mentioned in the podcast, right? And it's not like they've been putting these signs up for years or months or anything. The show comes out, and then all of a sudden, multiple people that they're telling me, oh, those are people who are all schizophrenic, are making signs that reference our show and the things in the show and the story of this town and the fact that there's a cult, call the FBI, you know, and everyone's involved. And like that was just, it's just, dude, so many crazy people have contacted me too, man. I've had messages from people telling me Pan will fall, Pan will be crushed. You have aligned yourself with Pan, and you will be destroyed along with him. You know,
Wow.
and just crazy messages that I'm like, when my wife's like, dude, what have you done? You know?
It seems that sounds like something that would come from a fundamentalist Christian, but how would they know about Pan? I mean, I guess they're just somehow they picked up the fact that the satanic imagery is modeled after Pan, or the hoofed
You,
half
do you know what
goat.
it is? No,
What?
I know what it is.
What?
They explained it. It was an esoteric Christian who'd been studying all of this
Oh.
stuff. Peter, right, who declared that Jesus was the Messiah
Hmm.
and built the first Christian church. Guess where the first Christian church was built? Pan's Grotto. This is,
Oh.
and see, and so this they're sending me all this information. There's all kinds of news stories pop up about it. 2 weeks after that, I start getting these messages all over the news. First Christian church discovered in Pan's Grotto, right? And they have all this stuff. Look at it, just Google Pan's Grotto Christian Church, and you'll find all of these news stories. But so like, and that person has sent me messages for quite a while now about this, and there have been things in the messages that only had a meaning to me that they couldn't have possibly known. You know, that it's just too much to get to go into, but it is. It's just like there's a weird signal that's being broadcast and that's being received in a weird way, right? And it's that whole relationship of this, the feedback of all of this. You know, a lot of these things don't have meaning until we're a part of the equation, you know? And you want to say, well, that's just because you're giving it meaning. But the meaning exists. You know, I've got the meaning, this has the meaning. Together, it's an undeniable correspondence, I guess, is the way that you would say it. I mean, to think about this, the story that I've told in Pennyroyal and what we've been talking about tonight, it's too incredible. Like all of these things together, which are all verifiable, which anybody can go pull these newspaper articles on, right? Which we've been giving everybody all this stuff. It's like, look at all of this. Tell us what this means, right? Tell me what this means. Like, how is it that all of these things are lining up in the way that they have, connected in the way that they have, with people we don't even know? You know, it mix Greg and those guys in here. What a weird intersection, you know, for both groups, and it just continues. It's
It's
just
fascinating.
the more that we engage with it, it's just a strange thing, man.
I,
I don't
I
know.
I only see it continuing to build more and more.
I think so. I mean, once I tell you some of this stuff too, you'll be like, "Holy shit, dude! What are you gonna do?"
Well, let's get on with that. I will first ask you when, pardon me, if I can talk, when is the second season slated to come out?
So we'll be releasing. I don't think I've told anybody. You may be the first show that we've talked about this on, but
Cool.
September the 21st. The show should be done around June, end of June. I've done so many interviews for the second season that are part of all of this, but officially we'll be releasing it September the 21st.
Nice.
I have eight episodes that we're working on. Another 8 episodes. It may be 10, just because I've got so much that you know what I'm saying. So I was like,
Yeah.
you know what, we could do 10, and we're not so rushed this time. You know, the first season it was really like my wife was like, dude, you've got to set a date and just get this done. You know, and we did, and it definitely was a mad rush. And but this time I'm kind of we've been working on it since it never stopped. We've just been recording nonstop since we released the first season.
Yeah.
So anyway, but September the 21st, our Patreons we've got this thing, the Liminal Lodge. If you look up Pennyroyal on Patreon, you'll find the Liminal Lodge. That's sort of our research group, and it's like $9 a month, but everybody that's part of that, the secret Facebook group, and we put all of our research there. Derry and I have done a lot of he and I do a lot of software development for clients, and we've done a lot of data mining for the automotive industry. And so we've been building data mining software for this, which has helped us with the investigation, especially with like the FBI documents and stuff to be able to analyze all this. And then we've been experimenting with software like the channel bot that uses random number generators and intention to see if people can channel, scanned text. So anyway, we're doing a lot of experiments like that, but really it's like we're putting, all the FBI files that we found for the Good Terma stuff, that's all on there for everybody to dig into and help us figure out. So if anybody's interested in like helping us, with the mystery and kind of with the research of all this stuff, we've got a great group already that exists, and through the week we're constantly releasing content. This is research, you know what I mean? It's just all the stuff we've been talking about, the stuff I'm going to tell you about. A lot of that stuff that group already knows. They're telling me shit, which is great. It's like you hand over these things to them and they're like, dude, did you look at this? Did you see this? and a lot of them are magicians or practice magic, in their labs. And, I don't. So they're showing me things I would have never even thought of. So anyway, if anybody's interested in that, definitely check that out. And then obviously the podcast is, everywhere, on Apple or Spotify. I think the Spotify looks the coolest. I really love how they do. You know what I'm saying? Like with the colors and everything matches. It looks beautiful. So, but yeah.
And what's the website for the podcast?
PennyRoyalPodcast.com. If you just want to go straight to the podcast website, you can listen to it there. But yeah, Apple Podcast, Spotify, it's on everything else. But
cool.
Yeah, man. Dude, thank you again for having me on tonight.
I mean, my pleasure.
I really enjoyed talking about all this with you.
Yeah.
I love you. I love your podcast. I think I think everything that you're doing, everyone that you're talking to, this whole just consciousness and just every way that you're approaching this, it's just fantastic.
Shucks, Nathan.
It's great.
You're trying to make me blush.
No, man. Anyway, thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely. And if anybody has not listened to his podcast, I highly suggest you check it out. Very excellent, high quality. You can tell a lot of time and love and energy has gone into it, and I can't wait to see where it goes. It's amazing. I listened to the whole thing twice, so there's that. All right. Thanks so much, Nathan.
Thanks, man.
If you like what you've heard and would like to contribute to The Melt, there are a few ways that you can do so. The most tangible way would be financially by clicking the Patreon link in the episode notes, and there you will find a multitude of ways that you can help for as little as $1 a month. This helps to keep making The Melt better, pay the bills, and help to make this podcast my full-time job that I can fully devote my time to and give you more content. Another way of helping would be by going to wherever it is that you subscribe to The Melt and give it a favorable review or rating that will help to get it out to more people. And lastly, if neither of those options are readily available, simply send your good thoughts and intentions. In an interconnected and quantumly entangled multiverse, these also go a long way. Thank you.